Alright, welcome to this first of a kind data access livestream in which we will cover DataFlex 2023, which was released just yesterday. Now first off, let's introduce ourselves. My name is Bram and I'm part of the R&D team at Data Access Europe. And during this livestream I will be giving you all the ins and outs of DataFlex 2023. Now, and I'm here with...
Well, I'm Robin Hazewinkel and I'm fairly new to DataFlex, and I will be showing you every feature that Bram is going to explain to you today.
Right, so during this livestream we will cover all the major features of DataFlex 2023 from the What's New, which you can find in the description. Now, you can download, to program along, you can download DataFlex 2023 yourself from downloads.dataaccess.com. Now, if you do not have a license yet, don't worry, as you will get the 60-day trial and you can even get a free personal license. Now, during this livestream we will answer any question that you might have, either on screen here or one of our colleagues behind the cameras, which will answer you in the chat. If you do not see the chat, you might have to take a refresh, so do that now if you want to. Now to start off, let's just take a look at the What's New.
Alright, so if I open the What's New page, you will be greeted with a nice motion graphic that you can watch on yourself. And it will be showing you all the new features of DataFlex 2023. But if we scroll down a bit, we can see all the new features step by step. And the first feature is take Windows applications to the next level. And I see something about FlexTron here. So Bram, can you explain to me what FlexTron is about?
Yeah, so FlexTron is a technology in which we allow current Windows application which you have built in DataFlex to allow current or newer web components, like for example a call editor, file, or even a scheduler, but within your current Windows applications, which is fairly easy to do. And you can even use FlexTron to make a slower migration if you have plans to migrate your Windows applications to web. So I think we should just take a look at FlexTron and see it in action using the examples that come with DataFlex 2023.
Alright, so I've opened the DataFlex Studio, and if we open a new workspace, we go into the directory of DataFlex 23.0 examples, and there we have a FlexTron directory and a workspace. So if we open that, then we can see we have a couple of projects. So can you tell me about them?
Yeah, so the first one is Web and Windows, and in this example we show a current Windows application which uses web technology. And then secondly, in the second example, we have a web or the mobile port which runs the complete web or the mobile, but on your current local machine. But first up, I think we should just take a look at the Web and Windows.
Alright, so I'm going to compile this. And it's going to open a nice project. And if I take a look, we can see we have 3 views. So we start at the top?
Yeah, right from the top.
Alright, so can you explain a little bit about this view?
Yeah, so this view essentially explains how the communication works between Windows and web components. And as you'll see in a minute, we have the web control host on the left side and then some Windows components on the right. And in this first case, we have 2 web components, so a web form and a web button. And if you click on the button, you will automatically see that it changes the text accordingly with a default website of PS value. And then in the second example, we have a bit of a difference, because now we have a Windows button which essentially does the same, but it will work just like it should.
Alright.
And then the third one is a variation, because now we have an event which fires many times. So in this case, you'll see as you type in the Windows form that it automatically updates the value within the web form as well. And then lastly, we have 2 web control hosts. And in this case, if you use the slide button on the left, then it will automatically enable the PP enable property.
Alright. That's pretty clear.
Yeah.
So shall we go to the next view, or do you have something else?
Yeah, let's go to the next view.
Alright. The next view is called Mixed Data Entry.
Yeah, so in this example we show data aware controls. And here at the top you can clearly see that these are the Windows controls. But as you select a record, you will also automatically see that the values in the web container are updated as well. So maybe just use the lookup.
Alright, so there's a button here.
This is clearly a Windows lookup, and as you see, it automatically updates the values in the web components as well.
Alright. So is there a specific version of control host for this, or?
Yeah, so just like with the normal Windows components, we have the DB version for data aware, and as such we also have a DB web control host as well.
Alright, so we go to the next view.
Yeah, let's go. And you can clearly see here that this is clearly a port of the order view, which many DataFlexes or existing DataFlexes already know. And if you select a record, you can also see that we are using the DB control host here as well. But now we have a full WebList. And the WebList brings some features which the code jog grids do not yet have. And if you right click on the WebList header, you can see that we can disable, hide or show columns, as well as drag the columns around to whatever orientation that you might like.
All right, and I can restore them.
Yeah. I also see a question here. Is the FlexTron based off WebView 2? Yeah, so FlexTron is completely based off WebView 2, which we brought in 20.1. So essentially, these web control hosts are just separate small browsers. And I think the easiest way to see is that we can actually enable the context menu, or rather the developer tools, which you would normally also see in a browser. So if we want to do that, let's just take the communication view in this case.
All right.
And you can clearly see here at the top that we now have the web control host. And this is essentially just as you would normally use a panel or a container in that case, and you can just nest the web controls in them. Now, to get the developer tools in there, we need to set two properties. So one is PBR DevTools enabled, if I remember correctly.
I will search for them. Here they are.
Yes, and then you have two options. You can enable accelerator keys, so these are special function keys like F12, like you would normally use to get the developer tools, but there's also a way with the default context menus with the inspect button, so maybe enable that, which should be somewhat too upwards. Yeah. Right, and now if you play,
compile
and go to the view.
Yes, and we did it on the communication view.
All right. And now, anywhere within the controls, you should be able to right-click and clearly see that this is the normal context menu, which would normally have an edge as well. And if you click on Expect, you'll automatically see the developer tools. So you can clearly see that this FlexTron host uses HTML, CSS, and anything that you might like. And as such, you can also customize the controls to whatever style you have in your application. So that essentially shows how FlexTron is dependent on WebView 2. Then I have another question here from Mark Mowers. With FlexTron, can we mix Windows and web components, for example, using a web accordion container with Windows forms inside it? You mix web controls with Windows. So you can't use Windows controls within a web container as such. So that's something to watch out for in this case. Let's see. But of course, so that is one of the things. But of course, as the web control is a complete browser, of course, we can't have COM controls or anything like that inside it. So that, I think that should pretty much explain the question here.
Well, I have a question. Do you still need IIS for this?
Yeah, so as it's a WebView component, WebView 2 component, you don't need IIS because it's we pretty much redirect a URL to your current directory, and as such, in this case, is the default app.html directory if you're already familiar with a web app. And as such, if you want to deliver your application to your customers, you just need an app.html folder there, and it will automatically use that as well. So you don't need IIS for this, it's just plug and play.
Cool. Shall we go to the next point on the what's new?
Yeah, first up, we have one more project here. So of course, this was using web controls within a Windows application, but with FlexTron, you also have the possibility to port web applications to Windows, or rather to use them locally. And in this case, with the WebOrder mobile, if you run it, you will see that we get the full one-to-one experience of a web app, but then locally in a Windows window. And I think this is pretty much the WebOrder mobile example that you can already find as a web app. But I think it should be nice that as we continue, we use this example to actually build our features in. So let's go to the what's new and take a look at the next feature.
All right. So I'm going to open the what's new, and we've taken a look at this point. And if we go to the next point, it says bring DataFlex-SQL backends closer to you. And I see something about embedded SQL. So can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, so as the industry moves more and more to SQL, We also want to enable developers to work with SQL more natively within DataFlex. And there are a couple of libraries out there for embedded SQL within DataFlex, but as we now have brought it to the runtime, we are able to do native type conversion, as you will see in a minute, but also to make it more incorporated within the studio. So we'll see SQL highlighting, code sense, and all those kinds of features which you now can finally have within DataFlex. So you can easily find that. So to start off, I think we should convert the embedded database for SQL. So let's start off with that one.
All right.
And then we'll move along.
Yes. So I'm going to the SQL conversion wizard to convert the DataFlex database to an SQL database. As you can see, I don't have a connection ID yet, so I'm going to add one. And I will call it ID1 and use the local SQL for this. And I will create a database called SQL test.
By the way, this is SQL Server, and if you have any other database, of course, that's possible as well with the Embedded Database API.
All right. So I've made a connection ID and saved this. I also tested. I want all the database tables, and at this point, it's pretty much clicked through.
All right. So the first thing I think we should take a look at is the query tester, which I think the easiest way is to go to the database menu, and then all the way at the bottom you'll see query tester. And using this feature, you can essentially type any SQL dialect that your database depends on. So that's something to think about. If you have an SQL database, you also need the SQL dialect in here, and of course that's also different from MySQL as well. Yeah, so at the top, as long as you have the right connection ID, you should be able to select any data. I have a question here. Can I use all web libraries with FlexTron? Yes, you can. So with FlexTron, you can pretty much download any library on the download center, or any foreign library as well, and use it practically the same as you would in a normal web app. So you would need to include the JavaScript files and CSS if it has one, and aside from that, it's pretty much plug and play like you would normally use with a web app as well. So that's the quill editor, scheduler, pretty much anything that you can think of. So no RTF anymore for those. Many Windows customers would like to have an HTML editor, and now they pretty much natively can in that sense. So that's very nice. Yeah.
So let's go back to the
SQL. Yeah. So
I've already typed a little query here.
Yeah. So as you can see, we now have the syntax highlighting for SQL, both here in the query tester as well as in code, which we'll probably demonstrate in a minute. And you can also have the code sense to actually highlight any tables that you might have, as well as some SQL features. Of course, this depends on your native dialect, and as such, it might be somewhat rudimentary, because of course we can't cover all the dialects, which is kind of a problem there, but you'll get at least some sense of what you can type anywhere. So that's, So now we have a basic selection.
Can I just execute this?
Yeah, you can pretty much play. And you'll automatically see the table pop up and see all the data that you requested. Now I think we should trim this down a bit. So maybe just use the customer number, name and city perhaps.
Customer number, and you said name?
Yeah.
And the city.
Meanwhile, we got a question. How much improvement does embedded SQL bring, and how much quicker is it? Besides of course the fact that we always had libraries, so those were in Flex code, and now we've brought them to the runtime as well. And of course we can't put an exact measure on it, but we have seen cases in which it could be up to 5 times faster than using the data dictionaries, because the data dictionaries perform additional validations, which SQL of course doesn't provide. And also as such, because it doesn't have those validations, you are required to use SQL, or at least we advise you to use SQL only in ways in which the data is read-only. So think of WebList to load large data sets, for example. So that's really what it's meant for. Should you want to insert data, of course, we do advise you to use those data dictionaries, as it's much safer.
All right. So we'll take a look at the where clause that we can add.
Yeah, so of course we have parameter binding, which is of course not SQL dialect related. So this is purely in DataFlex. So if we do a where clause, for example, on the city,
Yeah.
You can create a variable with the $sign.
All right. And then
Go, yeah. And then you can pretty much name this variable whatever you want. And then click on prepare, and you will automatically see a panel pop up in which you can, put a value to actually test the query itself. So in this case, I know from experience that Miami has 2 customers in here, so maybe try that.
And then just execute it.
Yeah. Yeah, so that was a good guess, I suppose. One thing that the query tester also automatically does is show structs, because of course with the SQL executor, which we'll see in a minute, we can also move the data directly to a struct. So if you open the struct generation, you can see here that we have a struct, as well as the labels within here.
All right.
So you can either save this to a file or copy it to the clipboards and then use that later on.
And I need to save this SQL.
Yeah. So let's use this query later on and save this to the app source directory in this case. Yeah, name it anything.
All right. And how do we show?
Yeah. So let's just create a new view in which we'll cover pretty much, I think, most subjects here. So yeah, just an empty web view would be the best.
So this is a generated web view.
Yeah.
You need to include it in the
menu.
Yeah. So I go down here, demo techniques, and I pick the last object here, and I'll just insert it, give it another name. And I will take this object name and put it here. And if we run this again, we're going to see that we have a new menu item here, SQL test with our default.
Okay, so of course, like I said, with the performance improvement, which we'll probably see in a minute here, I think we should just start with a WebList, which might be the easiest way to show the multi-row examples. Let's just start off with a WebList.
All right, so I will open the class palette, which I don't here, but I only see windows.
Yeah, if you right-click within the class palette, you should be able to switch to web controls. Of course, as we now are in a FlexTron application, or rather a Windows application which uses FlexTron technology, you now are also able to move the web controls as well.
All right, so here I have the web list.
Yeah, and then within the query we had 3 columns, so let's create 3 here as well. Of course, because we want to use SQL, we can't do any data binding in this case. So we won't use the entry item, but instead we'll set the DB grid type to GT manual.
So set DB grid type to
GT manual. Right. And then, of course, we need to abstract the on manual load data to actually get the data in here.
So if we go here, we go to events, and we can select the on manual load data.
Right.
And here we can add the data.
Yeah. So to actually do this, we need to see SQL executor. So first include that at the top, and then we can instantiate it within the view.
All right. So here can I make an object, SQL executor.
Right.
Yes.
And then we need to set the PS connection ID to the one we want. So you can also switch connections at runtime if you want to.
All right, that is set. Do we still need the SQL file here?
Yeah, so one of the ways that you can include these SQL files is with the include text command, which is new to DataFlex 2023. And you can include a file and then include it as a string. So let's include lowercase text. And then you can select the file like you would normally do with a use command.
All right.
And then you use as and then any variable name, and as is constant, of course, we should make it somewhat generic. Let's see, I've got 2 questions in. Will Johnson, I was wondering, can I do multiple select statements in the query tester? Yes, you can. Maybe we can still show that.
I will go back to the query tester. Select everything from customer. And what do you want?
Yeah, then we have to use the comma with a break at the end. Yes. And then do an additional command, so like order or something.
Or the detail.
Yeah. And then you have the multiple result sets. Should be at the top right there. Yeah, so in this you can clearly see that we can switch, and also with the SQL executor you can use a double dimensional array, and as such you can get all those values in there within one query, or at least one query in total, of course there are 2 separate ones. And then secondly, does the syntax highlighting understand all SQL dialects? Yeah, so like I said, this is quite a complicated question because of course we have many SQL dialects because there was never a standard for it really. We did add the more generic SQL statements, so pretty much all the standard functions are in there, like left and all those kinds of things, so you will get suggestions for those. But if you use very native constants or very particular cases, of course we can't really provide SQL syntax highlight or suggestions for that, because of course if you then have a MySQL database which doesn't support those, then you get mixed up. So that's the reason why we kept it quite rudimentary in that sense. And then the last one before we continue, the SQL executor object, what's tenant safe? If no need to refresh connection. So the question is here, is the SQL executor multi-tenant safe? So can you use it with multiple, use it without refreshing connections? Yeah, so the problem with those SQL executor libraries, which we previously had, is that they either didn't automatically refresh the connection or there had to be steps in between. In this case, with the runtime SQL executor, it used the actual database API, which DataFlex uses internally, and as such the connection is automatically refreshed, so you don't need to take another look at these refreshing connections, which is completely done automatically now.
So we take a look at the loading from the data.
Yeah. So of course we now have the include text command, which includes text. And the first step, because of course we have that parameter in there, we need to do a prepare. So that's send SQL prepare.
And then what do we need to type here?
Yeah, so then of course it asks for the query. So in this case we have that constant.
Yes.
Right.
Next.
And then, because we have prepared the query, you will need to handle additional errors, because of course you can have syntax errors or things like that. And in this case, we have used the error indicator. So if you want to handle errors, or there is a possibility of an error, you should handle the error indicator in this case.
Just like this.
Yeah, right. And of course, you can use custom errors as well. You can also set it in the SQL executor that you get the errors. There are also events to handle in that case. So if there is an error, you can handle an event as well, or do it this way. So now that we have prepared the statement, we should set the parameters. So in this case, let's send SQL set parameter, I believe it is.
SQL set argument. Set parameter.
Set parameter.
Oh yeah, there it is.
Right.
And then the parameter name, so city. And then the value. Should we take Miami again, or nothing?
Yeah. Let's do Miami because we're sure that we get the the request from that.
All right.
Okay, so now we've prepared the statement, we can now actually execute the query, and there are two variations. One is the SQL execute direct, and one is the SQL execute. And the execute is for when you have prepared the statements. In this case, we can get SQL execute.
And where do I need to put the data?
Yeah, and this is kind of the significant thing about the SQL executor within the runtime, because now we have, pardon me, the native type conversion. And now you can actually move the data directly to either structures, which you could get out of the struct generator, or you can even move them to the web rows, which the SQL executor has native support for. So in this case, we can move the data directly to the added rows parameter and fill the data in that way. So you should pretty much be able to run this.
Let's take a look.
By the way, I noticed that we don't do a grid refresh yet.
So it won't show any data now.
No. Right. So we need to handle the procedure, the on before show, and do a grid refresh there.
And do I need to do that in the list or in the view?
Let's do it in the view. Let me see if there are any more questions in the meantime. Question, is the SQL syntax highlighter extensible? Meaning, can the user community help add support for other flavors of SQL currently or not fully fleshed out, or for our own custom functions? Officially, no. We don't have a nice way to actually do that. Of course, you could dig around in the lib folder, which has the DataFlex.language file, which is completely XML. And you should be able to get at least the syntax highlighting in there, but we do not recommend it. And maybe in a later release, like our future revisions, we might make this extensible or give you options to do such things.
So we take a look at the view. As you can see, now we have data in there.
Yeah, so now we have the data. Yes.
And so we take a look at the other SQL notation.
Yeah, so of course now we have used the preparation of a statement, because now we use the include text. But like I said, you can also use a SQL execute direct function. And in this case, you don't need to prepare or set parameters. So while you're doing that, I noticed that you said you use the // comments. But with DataFlex 2023, you also have new string options. One included is multi-comments. And as opposed to the Ctrl/ key shortcut which you use now, if you use the Shift key with that, you can have multi-comment selection. And you can use this in between code. So if you want to mark a parameter as optional or anything like that, which is quite common these days, you can also do that, and it will still compile and skip that. So that's quite nice if you want to use it. So to do the direct SQL execute, we can just straightly go to the get. So get SQL execute direct.
Yes.
And I can see that now we here have the query. And like I said, with DataFlex 2023, we added multiple variations of strings, and one is the SQL notation and also code sense, but within strings. And you can use that using the add SQL. And you can use that with the multi-line string, or rather the DataFlex 21 multi-line string. But we now also added a triple double quote multi-line string in which we don't have the spacing. So if you use the multi-line string from DataFlex 20.1, you would also have noticed that we have spacing in the front of it, but with the triple quotes you won't have that, because now we align it at the last triple double quotes. Yeah. So every spacing before that is removed. So your code will look much tidier in that sense. Yeah, so let's just fetch all data in this case.
All data? Or just the three columns?
Yeah, the 3 columns from customer without the where clause. See if there are any more questions. Should we use the Hungarian notation in the query to the struct generation? Yeah, of course, that's kind of your own opinion on that. Within DataFlex, of course, we are somewhat obliged to use Hungarian notation because it makes very clear what the variable type is. Of course, you don't have to. And like you might have noticed, you can also turn it off within the struct generator, which will disable that and just use the columns themselves. As long as the name meta tag above the member has the name of the also the column name within the database, it will automatically fill that in. So that's just one thing to be aware of, and other than that, you can pretty much name the members whatever you want. All right, so now we have a direct execute statement. So let's just run it and see whatever data we get.
Yes, so it's going to compile and open our view. And now we get the same data, but all the data without the where from my end.
Right, so that seems to work.
I think that was it for this part.
Yeah, so let's do a small break. And then we can get back within 5 minutes or so. All right, and we're back. So before the break, we actually handled the embedded SQL. And to get to the next topic, I think we should take a look at what the WebList brings in this case. So if we take a look at the what's new, then we should see
the WebGrid.
The grid layout.
It says a new way to build web interfaces and the WebGrid layout.
Right. So up until now, we had the floating layout, or rather, that's the way we call it. And with the floating layout, what it essentially means is that your controls will automatically float upwards as such floating layout. But this might bring some problems with it because you can't place the controls exactly where you want to. And for DataFlex 2023, we added the grid layout. So maybe to actually test it, how about I give you a little task here? If you take a look at the designer.
Yes, I will.
What if you will try to get a button next to the WebList? And that's either in the middle or at the bottom right next to the WebList.
Alright, so I will drag from the class palette button in the view. I will do that below the WebList. And if we take a look at the editor here, I think I didn't do it right. I think I put it in the WebList.
Yeah, it wouldn't work that way.
Yeah. So now I have a button here,
yeah.
And I need to make the WebList a little bit smaller here. So I can put the button besides it, and that needs to be also a little bit smaller. And then I can drag it really in the middle.
Yeah, so there are two ways to fix this. One is to use the supplementary panel layout, so in which case you can map panels to the left and to the right side. And then nest it from there with a spacer.
Yeah.
You can also use a web container, so either a group or anything that occupies at least the horizontal space, and then use a spacer from that way. But you can clearly see that at this point you're just nesting and struggling at this point. And now with the grid layout, you will see that it works pretty much very easy. So to do that, let's go back to the code, and all the way at the top of the view, you should be able to set PE layout type.
Layout type to
LT grid.
LT grid is there.
So for backwards compatibility, of course, we keep the floating layout by default, and then you can set the PE layout type to LT grid, and then it will also recursively work. So of course you can have a full view on floating, and then within a web group or any container for that matter, you can set it to another layout, and then it will also work downwards that way. So you can pretty much very dynamically work with that. So first let's set the PE row count within the code. So within the panel.
In the web view?
Within the panel is the thing I think is easiest. Additionally to the PE column count, we now also have a row count, and this is specifically for grid, so it won't do anything within the flow layout. But now we have a grid, so these are just tiny boxes, which we'll see in a minute. But now with the rows, you can actually span how much you want to move the objects downwards. So let's set it to 12 as well, or something like that. Right, and now if we go back to the designer, you should be able to click within the grid, and now you can see on the right side we have a little icon. Right, and this is your grid. So you can clearly see that now we have 12 different rows and also 12 columns. And what you now can do is you can move the button anywhere you want, and indeed also drag the rows around as you move them. And now if you use the drag handle, you can place them pretty much wherever you want, as long as you fiddle around with it a little bit yourself. If you go back to the grid, then you should also be able to click on the slider on the left side of a row.
This one?
Yeah. And you can see here that you can also use percentages and all those kinds of things to make it actually look nice. Of course, we are just trying around here. But that way you can actually map the whole row counts and sizing of each row.
All right. So these are the differences between grid and flow layout.
Yeah. So you can pretty much place them wherever you want. And you can see that the WebList in this case is a little bit different. You can see that every control in this case, you can already see that the indicator is a bit weird. And that is because every control now has a natural control height. And this essentially means that it will occupy the minimum space that it needs. And to fix that, you can set the PB fill height property, which now behaves different within the WebGrid, within the grid layout. And using that, it will only span the height which it's actually set to use.
All right, so I set the PB fill height, and if we go back to
and now you can automatically see that it only maps to the rows that you specifically set. Question in the meantime, is the grid layout based on the CSS grid feature? So if you're familiar with the CSS grid feature in CSS, it's a feature from I think 2017, but don't hold me accountable for that. And as more and more browsers started to accept it, we now also have based our grid feature on the CSS grid as well. So if you're familiar with it, you'll probably notice the clear resemblance of that.
Another question.
Another question coming in. Can you show the generated code in the button object for its position? Yeah, of course.
So this is the code that is generated for the button.
Yeah. So maybe you read it to me.
As you can't read it. So it has set the PI column span to 2, the caption which was already set, and then it has 2 index properties, the PI column index and the PI row index. So that's how it decides where it wants to stay in the in the grid.
So the column index, as it was before, is of course based. Sorry, another question coming in. But the column index is just like it was used before within the floating layout. So this is purely horizontal. And now with the row index, you actually set the offset on the vertical space. So that's how it works. So I hope that answered your question. Okay, how does that, I have a question from Alan. How does that work when it's resized? I assume he means the browser size. So the grid automatically, like I said, you can set percentages. So in that case, as long as you use percentages, in that case, it should pretty much be even more responsive than the floating layout already was. So if you're on mobile, it should provide a very nice way to actually make applications even more responsive than they can already be. But that essentially just means if you use pixels or anything like that, so it really depends on how you program it, whether it will be as responsive as you want the application to be.
All right, so we go to the next point?
Yeah, let's do that.
So we go back to the what's new.
Yeah, so I think this pretty much demonstrated what the grid is. So you have pretty much a lot more freedom than with the floating layout. So I hope you create your more beautiful application than you already could. So the next feature is, like I said, WebList. And we changed, of course, like in 20.1, we already added a lot of more features, and with 2023, we did even more. So if you just go to the sample, and maybe span the WebList to its full size again, because otherwise it might look a bit weird.
So it's now at the bottom, but at full size. And we go to the list.
Yeah, right. So first up, what we added to DataFlex 2023 is grouping, which works pretty easy and is a much requested feature if you used Syncfusion before. So the only thing that you really need to do is set the PE grouping to group automatic.
PE automatic, sorry?
GRP automatic.
GRP automatic.
Yeah. One thing to do notice is that you shouldn't leave paging on. Of course, the WebList uses paging underneath. So as such, if you start grouping, it won't have all the data yet. So you should either use GT manual like we do now with an SQL loaded data set, or of course you can use GT all data, and in that case it will always load all data up front. So then you can make sure that the grouping is actually valid. Right, so just start this application.
All right. So if we start this application and we go back to the full size first and then to the view, you can now see.
Yeah, let's make the height a bit more, because otherwise.
I will uncomment the button, or comment the button. Yeah. And if you take a look at
yeah,
it's a
now
little bit bigger.
You can also see that the rows don't actually take up anything anymore, because it moves automatically up. Right, so now you can clearly see that we have grouping, and you can also nest them. So you do the grouping by right-clicking on the header row, and in this case, I believe you still have something cached. But in this case, you can select any column on which you want to actually group. So of course, city in this case makes a lot of sense, but you can also add additional groupings on, for example, the name or anything like that, really.
I will show that a little bit better because I don't have the right column names. So that was a customer number. And then you can see that it's going to group nicely on the right values. And then we're going to start it again. And as you will see now, when we go back to the view and add grouping, now it is.
Yeah, now it uses the right names.
Yes.
But you can clearly see that if you now also add an additional column, it will keep on nesting. One thing to do notice is that on the right you can see the total of rows in a group. You can customize the full grouping as well. So if you maybe move back to the code, yeah, you will see on manual load data that it now has additional parameters. So your existing code, of course, won't break, will work like it used to, but now we have the additional parameters in which, if you want to, you can also set the manual groupings, including the text on the right, so the total amounts, all those kinds of things which you can set here. So that's essentially grouping.
Yeah.
One additional feature that we added for DataFlex 2023 is the WebMultiSelectList. And this is of course based on the idea that many customers of ours wanted to select rows in an easy way, which wasn't really possible because you had to manually add a CWeb checkbox, column checkbox, and then create somewhat of a web property and keep track of the selection yourself, which of course, is kind of tedious.
Yeah.
But now with the WebMultiSelectList, this is all done automatically. And you can get the selection with a simple function. You can get an array out of that. You can even handle events for it. And the only thing that you really need to do is change the class to WebMultiSelectList. And while you then start the application, let me see if there are any more questions. Will Johnson, in which case should I use the flow layout over the grid layout? Right, so there isn't really a should, it's more of what do you need, right? So of course it might fully depend on what type of application you're creating, but also the style that you want to adopt. So if you could clearly see that with the button all the way on the right, of course with panels it really depends on how you want your view to look, and as such also how you want to use it. So it really depends on how you want your view to be, and if floating layout is the best for that, and then you use that one, and otherwise you can use grid. And then another question, can you define totals other than counts on grouping? I believe it's just a string. Maybe you can take a look at the struct, which is passed into there. So I think it should be the group headers if you do go to definition on that. You should do it on the type.
Here?
No, on the struct itself. Yeah, that one. Right. Do you see the?
As total, it's a string.
Yeah, it's a string. So you should pretty much be able to put anything in there you want. So I hope that answers your question, but quite easy. But yeah, so it's a string, so you can pretty much put anything in there that you want. Yeah.
All right. I saw that you had, that we had grouping on.
Yeah, let's turn it off. Of course, it works for the WebMultiSelectList as well, but it might not make as much sense as it would on a normal WebList.
Yeah.
Yeah, so let's just run it this way.
If we go back to the view and we open SQL test, now we see that we have.
Yeah, you can immediately see, or at least to a first opinion, strange behavior. And that's because the WebMultiSelectList is quite customizable in its behaviors. So just like that, with no properties set at all, it pretty much mimics Windows Explorer in that sense. So if you're familiar with Windows Explorer, of course, if you select a file, or would normally select a file, then you can use, of course, Shift Select. You can Control Select, and of course, if you then click on another row, you will see that the rest of the selection removes itself. So that's pretty much standard Windows Explorer behavior. And with two properties and also an additional column, you can make this a whole more web-like, but it really depends on whatever you want. So first up is, of course, that we don't want the additional, so if you click on another row, then it removes the other ones. So that is, let me think, the PB selection by row. So if you turn that off, then that should really fix the multi-selection in one go.
And do we need to do something about the keyboard selection?
Yeah. Let's do that now. So you can also enable that with the pretty much the same one. So that's keyboard selection. Right.
And do we need the extra column for the checkbox now?
Let's show this first.
All right.
Then we have a question from Niels. Can I add as many rows as possible? Which I'm presuming you're talking about the grid layout. I think there is a limit somewhere, but you know, it's like in the thousands. So I think you should pretty much be fine. Yeah. So yeah. So it's pretty much yeah. You won't notice that one.
All right. If we take a look at the WebList now, I don't see any.
Right, so of course there is no selection right now, and that's because at this point you really want to have a checkbox, of course, which you know is behavior that is more web focused, and you do that with an additional column.
So I will make an extra column.
Right.
With
the exception only really makes sense at the beginning, but. And the question, can you also add checkbox columns? Well, you're just about to do that right now, Hans.
And is that everything I need to do?
Yeah, so not the web column, but a selection indicator, which we need. Web column.
Web column selection indicator. Yeah. And that's everything?
Yeah. No, because we use on manual load data, we need an additional column. And of course, you can loop manually, but I think the easiest way is to just add a null column to it in front. Then another question, let's see. Mobile. So, does this version already support generating a mobile app using the data dictionary in local database? Yes, it does. And that is because in this specific case, of course, we now have web order mobile. And assuming that this answers your question, the web order mobile uses a more drill down focused application. So you can clearly see that if you maybe go to the dashboard in this case, that if you search for a customer, you can then select the customer and as such drill down into the view. So this is of course more mobile focused. And you can clearly see that this automatically also uses data dictionaries to actually fill in all the data. And the application will automatically be responsive on mobile, so it will be more mobile focused in that sense. So I hope that that answers your question, and should it be any different, of course, let us know.
Should we take a look at the
let's go back to
our view?
Yeah, so now we have the checkbox in here, and you should just be able to use checkbox to select your items. So for Hans, I think this is what you meant. And then one more thing about this column is that you can also use it to select all the rows within the web list, and that's just one simple property within the column indicator. Set bb all selects, I believe.
If I can't find it, I will just type it. Set bb select all checkbox.
Yeah, true. By the way, you can use a caption normally, or if you don't set the pb select all checkbox, if that property isn't true, you just can use the caption if you want to, but it really depends on your style. How can I get the values of the checkboxes which are selected? Can I get an array with row ID or something like that? Yeah, let's show you that within a minute after I do this. So now we have the checkbox up top of the column, and if you tick it, it toggles all. So just as easy as that. Maybe if you go to the class itself, maybe just take a look at the class. We can open the help.
The help or the?
Yeah, you might do the help. Yeah, it's fine.
It is opened really big. So.
Okay, so if you go to the WebMultiSelect class. Oh, you already have it open. Right. So if you go to functions or methods.
Methods, yes.
All right, you can see that you get the selection there.
Get the selection.
So, maybe just go to the class. I can't find it right here.
Get list selection.
Yeah, sorry, list selection. Yeah, we prefixed that since in Alpha 1 it was selection, but it's list selection. Yeah, so to get the selection, you can see it as easy as this within the help. It's just a string array, and you can automatically get the list selection. And then the string array is, of course, the row IDs. So if you have the manual load data, of course, it uses the row IDs which you manually define. But if you just use it like this, and also the SQL or the SQL executor will also automatically put the row IDs in as well. So if you just use this array and then do a string to row ID conversion, then you should be able to look up the records as you want. So I hope that answers your question.
I think we talked about it all.
Right
about now.
Yeah.
So if there are any questions left, ask them now, so we can answer them. And otherwise, I think the live stream is almost done.
Yeah.
So do you have any new questions?
Not that I see right now. Yeah, so I think this was it. Of course, if there are any more questions, you can still answer them or still ask them in the chat, and we will even answer them after the stream for a bit. Should that not be possible, you can also, of course, always go to the forums. And in the description there are a couple of links. So one is to the What's New, of course, if you want to recap what we covered here. There's also a beautiful course from Harm about everything that's new in DataFlex 2023. And of course also a download link. Now I do see something coming in from Chuck. Oh nice, it does support row ID. Is this available for Windows grids? Well, that's funny that you should ask, because of course now we have FlexTron. So in this case you can always use the WebList in this case. Yeah, so
that was it.
yeah, I think too.
Oh, one more question. It's coming right now.
Yeah. The somebody is clearly missing a lava lamp. Yeah. Mine is really pretty. It's of course, DataFlex colors. You know, it's very nice. All right. So that was it pretty much for this live stream. Of course, if you want to see more content like this, let us know in the comments, or of course on the forums or in the events post. Yeah. So
that was it.
thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching.
And see you next time.